everybody. Welcome back to the new season. Norwich City, of course, start their campaign tomorrow afternoon at home against Hull City. And looking forward to that one. With me is my colleague Samuel Seaman this afternoon. Looking forward to being back, I suppose. Sam, I think that's probably the best place to start. I mean, how's your summer been? And I suppose, are you excited for the new season on the eve of what feels a little bit like Christmas, I suppose, for football fans?
Yeah, it's been okay. I have missed the football a little bit. Nice to get a break. I think we all needed it after how Norwich finished the season last season, and it wasn't an especially excited or positive place to be going to those Norwich games towards the back end of last season. So probably good to have a little bit of a break. But I think for the last 3 or 4 weeks now, I've been looking forward to getting back to watching competitive football and being back in that environment, because as much as there's been pre-season games for us to watch and cover, it doesn't quite feel the same as a packed Carrow Road on opening day, and I'm really looking forward to watching Norwich in some Championship action. I think if you're a football fan, it's pretty impossible not to get excited at this time of year. So I think Championship fans up and down the country and across the world will be absolutely buzzing, and I'm excited to be back on preview shows, back talking about actual real games that matter and that have points on the line, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Norwich can produce this season. How excited are you?
Yeah, I think sort of now it's got to the point where all the pre-season stuff is done, and I'm just ready to get stuck into the season. And of course, we're all hoping, fingers crossed, it's going to be a much more positive one for, I suppose, us fans that follow Norwich City. Going to Carrow Road, it was obviously quite tough at points last season, but also for us with our job, it's not very fun when you're going to West Brom on a Saturday and away, and you're sort of seeing a poor performance, and it feels like you're kind of repeating yourself. So it feels a bit of a clean slate, fresh players, of course, new players that will be making their debuts at Carrow Road tomorrow. I suppose, Sam, which one of those maybe are you most looking forward to seeing in the flesh for maybe the first time in a league game for Norwich City?
I actually really like Ashley Barnes, and I didn't expect to at all. I think when Norwich started this scheme of sort of signing older players and more experienced professionals, and maybe looking for a little bit more physicality and experience in those players, I wasn't especially excited. And I think we did a podcast actually where I spoke about how I thought that might have been the wrong direction. But I remember speaking to Elliot Bennett earlier in the summer, actually, before Barnes actually played any time in a Norwich shirt, and he spoke up his technical ability. And when you speak to people who have played with other people and obviously don't want to say a bad word about them, you always feel like you want to wait for the actual evidence of that to believe it. But to be fair to Elliot Bennett, I've actually been surprised by how much technical ability Barnes has got, and I think maybe he's been labelled with a lot of cliches that underrate his abilities, and perhaps people don't speak enough about some of the qualities that he does have, because I've been really surprised and pleasantly surprised by the strength of his hold-up play, how good his runs are, how willing he is to come back and help in that sort of number 10 position. And it felt like, to me, when I saw on paper that starting lineup of a 4-4-2 with Barnes and Sargent up front, I was really worried about how Norwich would get the ball from back to front and what that link would be. But Barnes seems actually far more comfortable than I expected personally, at coming in and receiving the ball off midfielders and defenders. And it's a part of his game that really suits him. So I'm actually looking forward to seeing what he can do in competitive games. I know he scored a hat-trick against Kings Lynn, but I'm not sure goal scoring is really his game. But thankfully, we've seen some of the elements that justify his inclusion in a team, aside from just that goal scoring, because I think that burden's going to mainly fall on Josh Sargent. And I'm really looking forward to watching more of Ashley Barnes. I think Jack Stacey is my sort of player, to be honest. But I think we all know that now, having watched him play a couple of times. He is a very good player, but I don't think he's really much of an unknown quantity. He's just a good modern fullback, and very, very solid. And for me, Stacey might well be Norwich's best signing of the summer. A little bit under the radar, probably, because he comes in as a right back, and somebody who hasn't necessarily had the most glamorous of careers so far. But he actually has a lot of Premier League game time under his belts and promotions on the CV as well. And I'm really excited to see what he can do for Norwich. But so far, most fans seem to be impressed with most of those signings in pre-season, and I am looking forward to seeing what they can all do, actually.
Yeah, I think Christian Faschnak's the one for me. Probably just looking at his pedigree over in the Swiss league, I think there's only 2 seasons that he's not scored more than 10 goals, which for a winger is obviously very, very good metrics. Difficult to maybe gauge in terms of how that will, correlate in terms of the championship and what output we'll see from him. But certainly a player that, given we've only sort of seen about, under 90 minutes of him so far in pre-season, it's one that maybe I'm really looking forward to seeing in the actual flesh tomorrow and see what he can do. Lots of comments and questions flooding through already. There's one here from Joe, which says, first, welcome back, gents. We're glad to be back providing you with this sort of content on a Friday lunchtime. What's the mood around Carrow Road tomorrow? And do you think we'll bring in any more signings? Well, I think on the signings one, that's been pretty well documented now that Norwich won't do any more business unless there's outs, which, would probably be more sort of linked to Andrew Amadaili and a centre back. But Sam, just on that first point, what's the mood going to be like tomorrow at Carrow Road? It's obviously at the end of last season, just 1 win in 11. It got quite toxic towards Stuart Webber more than anything. Of course, that's since transpired that he's going to be leaving his position. And I think it probably does need, as David Wagner spoke about yesterday in his press conference, it needs a new energy. The fans need to be on board from minute one tomorrow and bring the noise to maybe, create the unity that he spoke about so heavily during his whole sort of managerial career so far here at Carrow Road. So, what sort of impact can the fans have tomorrow, at Carrow Road, Sam?
Well, they can always have a huge impact, as we've seen in previous seasons. And I think that's one of the major good things about football is that no matter how badly things go, there's always a reset time. And Norwich avoided anything catastrophic last season. They obviously haven't been relegated, and they get to, as much as it might be quite difficult and they're not in that favourites bracket anymore, they do have another shot at trying to get up to the Premier League this season. And I think that fresh start will provide some optimism. I know the Norwich fans were feeling a little bit gloomy for the large majority of last season, but the club seemed to have picked up their part in galvanising that support a little bit more. We know that they weren't, or I think it's probably fair to say they weren't quite as focused on that last season as they maybe have previously, but clearly they've now recognised the importance of the fans. And I think hopefully that the supporters will respond in turn, because that fresh start that I spoke about, that excitement that every football fan has for the start of the season, should provide a little bit of if not optimism, then hopefully openness. And as well as David Wagner speaking about it, Chris Sutton wrote about it in his exclusive column for us earlier this week. And it's something that I think most people recognise needs to happen and needs to change if possible. And I think Norwich fans are the same. I don't think anyone is particularly desperate to draw out any of the unpleasantness that there was last season, especially given now, rightly or wrongly, they did want Stuart Webber gone. I think probably overall the majority, it was probably quite a close one, but potentially the majority did want Webber gone, and he is obviously still in the building. He will still be at Carrow Road, but you can't really shout for him to go anymore because he has already resigned. So without that person to rail against, and without those issues that fans want dealt with, which I think is fair, by the way, I'm not criticising that. Hopefully there isn't going to be too many options at negativity, and without the players actually having done anything wrong this season, I think at least tomorrow, unless Hull get an early goal, which I'm sure we're all hoping they don't, then I don't see the fans turning. I think they've proven before that it is a good fan base that can generate a good atmosphere and can make a difference to the team's performance and results. So yeah, I'm looking forward to being in that atmosphere, because I do personally quite strongly believe that it will be a positive one and an optimistic one, probably with a little bit less pressure as well, because, I've spoken before about how I felt they've got decisions wrong in the past, and they shouldn't be in a position now where they're almost underdogs to be promoted this season. But the fact is that they are, and that probably provides less pressure, because there's not the weight of expectation that there was last season. There's not Dean Smith and Stuart Webber coming out and saying that promotion is the target, and make no doubt about it, that is what David Wagner will be hoping for. But I don't think he's been as strongly conveying that message, and hopefully that will help alleviate some of the pressure. So yeah, I think the Norwich fans will be feeling quite positive, and hopefully the players can respond in turn and can keep that positivity up with a strong performance.
Yeah, you used the word pressure there a few times. I mean, there's, I suppose, maybe a feeling that David Wagner could come under pressure early this season, of course, given the way that the end of last season transpired, just 1 win in 11, as I already said at the top of the show. And it was obviously quite difficult. There was obviously the clean slate of the summer and a positive pre-season, lots of new signings and maybe a sort of fresh energy around the football club. But is it important Norwich get off to a fast start just to kind of bring the fans straight back on board? Maybe the ones that are slightly still a little bit pessimistic or maybe not feeling overly optimistic. And I suppose this whole maybe the perfect game for the opening game, especially at home. I suppose, they're maybe not one of the big guns in the Championship, no disrespect to them, but it looks a winnable game on paper, I suppose.
Yeah, I agree with you really, because Norwich fans will be wary of what happened with Dean Smith. And I remember at times us speaking last season when there maybe was a question around David Wagner's responsibility in that 1-in-11 run and in the poor performances towards the back end of last season. There was a lot of questions around him then, and we said that Norwich can't afford to get into that cycle of having to bring in a manager every October or November to try and rescue their season. So Norwich fans will be aware that that didn't work with Dean Smith, and that probably the wrong man led the club into that Championship season just because he couldn't be blamed for the Premier League failures. And I think that probably puts more pressure on David Wagner, because the reality is the only way for Norwich to get out of that cycle is either Wagner does well enough to keep his job for the whole season, or he goes in the first sort of 6 weeks and they manage to almost rebuild an entire season with a new manager. So, yeah, I think you're right in that there is a little bit more pressure on him going into this season, and that's absolutely right. And he should take some of the responsibility for last season and where that went wrong, because it was a squad of players that was good for the Championship, and they proved in games like the Millwall one, like the Blackburn one, that he had the players to produce good results and good performances, even though those wins over Preston and Coventry early on in his tenure showed that there was the squad to do that and the talent to do that. And I think there should be more responsibility on him to get the most out of those players. He's talked up how good the squad is, and if you want to do that, as much as I feel like most managers probably are forced into it a little bit, and you're not going to talk about how poor your squad is, but if he really does think he's got the ideal squad, which he said that he feels their business is complete unless certain players leave, and if that's the case, then it's his responsibility to get the best out of them. And I do certainly expect him to come under that pressure early on. As you say, probably the fact that it's Hull at home, I think in the Championship early on, the home part of that is probably more of it than the Hull part, because as much as I'm quite avid and I do try my best with my job, I'm not 100% across what Hull have done, and they maybe will come out with a strong side, but they come into it without any momentum because it's the first game of the season. Norwich are obviously the same, but they're at home in front of their fans. That hasn't happened too often in recent years, and it really gives them the chance to start positively. So I think there are a lot of things going in Norwich's favour going into this game. The pre-season that they had will add to that, and the pressure is definitely on David Wagner to have a fast start. And as much as I said, I think there'll be optimism and openness at Carrow Road, I don't expect that to last especially long, given how things are going for this club. I think they do need to start strongly, and if they're not going to win consistently at the start, then at least show what they're about and what they're trying to achieve, which is what David Wagner will attempt to do, obviously, starting tomorrow. So, looking forward to seeing if he can do that. And I think there's probably way more pressure actually on him than there is on the players at the moment.
Before we turn the attention to Hull City, just going to sort of get a little bit of your intake on the injury sort of situation at Norwich City. David Wagner outlined kind of where they are at the moment yesterday in his press conference. Borja signs, that looks like a really positive piece of news coming out. Looks like that injury is probably going to only sort of keep him out till the end of August now, where initially the diagnostics looked like it was going to be the start of October, which, given he hasn't really had a pre-season, that could have potentially led him not to really feature till the end of October. So that's positive. Jonathan Tompkinson, 2 to 3 weeks till he looks like he's going to be back. Of course, picked up that injury at Kaiserslautern. So again, massive boost to a side that probably needs that cover in the defensive positions. As we saw last season, the fact they had to opt to play, the likes of Jakob Sorensen at centre-back, that's certainly an area that is often causing Norwich City issues. Grant Hanley as well. Apparently, he's one who's very active around Colney, and he's in the in the building, I suppose you could say, and he's sort of keeping that bond with the players, which is important. Although he's probably not a player we're expected to see for quite a few months yet. But the one big blow, Sam, Jacob Sorensen, who, as we got the update yesterday, has not really taken well to the injections that have been causing him issues in his sort of pelvic area. So he's now been sent to go see a specialist. How big a blow is that for the lad? Because I mean, there's a lot of Norwich fans on social media that maybe still feel they need a defensive midfielder, albeit we've kind of spoke about it on these podcasts that that's not really a position that David Wagner wants. He's more of a man for the double pivot in midfield. So, but yeah, just on Jacob Sorensen, how big a blow is that for the lad who coming into a start of the season? It feels like he always probably picks up an injury at this kind of time.
Yeah, I think it's a huge one, not only for the impact it has at the start of this season, and it must be crushing to miss the start of the season because that's what you're gearing up to for 2 or 3 months, as much as obviously the pre-season isn't just to prepare for this whole game. You do almost have that as a date in the diary to look forward to, and when a player gets the news that they're going to miss that date, it must feel really like a crushing blow. But not only in the short term, I think in the long term, he's going to probably develop a reputation as a player who can't be relied upon from a fitness standpoint. And you look at the impact that's had on, for example, Sam Byram's career at Norwich. And every time you had a conversation about what a good player he was, you had to caveat it with the fact that he'd probably play barely any games and that he couldn't be trusted to be a guaranteed starter for the club. And I do worry for Sorensen because he's had so many injuries at this point and he's missed so many games through fitness issues that I'm not sure too many managers or coaches or whatever can really look at him as somebody who they trust, even if he was the perfect defensive midfielder. And I think he's a good player. I think he's definitely the closest thing Norwich have to somebody in that role and somebody who's proven on the ball that he can do it as well. I remember in that Blackburn win, he played 2 really good passes in the lead up to both of those goals. So he's got both sides to his game. But realistically, if you're Stuart Webber and you're looking at the Norwich squad, is there any point, if you wanted a defensive midfielder, which obviously he said, and it's true that Wagner doesn't necessarily want somebody in that traditional mould, but for example, if you're Stuart Webber looking for somebody in that position, can you look at it and say, you've got Jakob Sorensen, so you're covered? I think probably not. And that's why Norwich fans are still calling for somebody to fill in that position. So I think in terms of the long-term reliability of him, that is quite a significant blow, and it's quite worrying, especially given the issues with that midfield mix that you spoke about and the fact that Norwich fans have been crying out for an addition in that area. I think he's a player who keeps looking like he could be the surprise package and he could be breaking into the starting 11, but I don't think it's a coincidence that issues keep on cropping up right when it looks like he might get his chance. And I do wonder how many more of these he has before Norwich take the decision, like they probably did with Sam Byram, where they go, yes, he's a good player, but can he be relied upon? Because it doesn't really feel like he can be at the moment. But as you said, good news on Science and Tomkinson, which is what Norwich fans will be excited about. I think some of the fans at the fan sort of meet and greet I attended yesterday should have their Pink and Plus notifications on, because David Wagner's press conference had happened just before and they were asking Science about his injury and they could have had those answers. But no, in all seriousness, it was good actually to see their faces sort of light up when he gave them that positive news, and you can tell how much people are hoping that he's going to be a success at Norwich. He's the sort of signing that's really exciting for football fans, and I, for one, am looking forward to seeing him on the pitch at Carrow Road and in a David Wagner system with the numbers he's produced previously. He looks like he could be a real pickup. So yeah, some good news on that injury front, as well as the obvious bad news with Sorensen as well.
Yeah, like Norwich, Hull, of course, have done lots of business in the transfer window since the last time that the two sides met on Valentine's Day, actually, the 3-1 win at Carrow Road that Norwich picked up that evening. 15th place last season for the Tigers. I suppose a little bit disappointment because they brought in a new owner the sort of January time before the Turkish guy who seems to be sort of building some communications, which is something that was quite, I suppose, it was something that was spoke about in the media, the lack of or the issues that the Allams brought when they were at Hull. But Hull not won at Carrow Road since 2010, so there's a good omen there, although I'm sure, there's plenty of others that go against Norwich. Yeah, it seems like they've done sort of some decent business in the window, Sam. The likes of Vinagre on loan from Wolves, Connolly, who of course is well known from his sort of breakthrough at Brighton, who had a loan spell last season with Hull. Liam Delap on loan from Manchester City, who I think had a loan spell that maybe struggled a little bit at Stoke last year. So on paper, some relatively good signings. What sort of test do you expect from them tomorrow, and maybe where do you put Hull in terms of the Championship this season? I know it's kind of difficult given we're still at that pre-season stage.
I expect them to be in and around the mid-table, probably. I'm not sure they've got the squads to be challenging for those promotion places, but it is the Championship, and there's always one or two surprise packages in and around those playoff positions at least. So I wouldn't want to rule them out, especially given I think Liam Rossini is a fantastic coach, speaks really well and seems to have the right ideas. So I think he will succeed somewhere eventually. Whole fans will hope that's with them. And I think they have made good signings, as you spoke about. Liam Delap has a little bit of maybe a Patrick Bamford feel about him, where he's proven himself before, but he's just waiting to take off really at a senior level. Obviously struggled at Stoke and then didn't really make too much of a mark when that got cut short and he went to Preston. So yeah, I think they can present a danger, and in the Championship you always have to be wary. I know Norwich didn't have much to play for, but you have to remember they switched off a little bit and lost to relegated Blackpool in the last game of last season. So you can't ever really settle in the Championship, and it feels like a cliche, and I don't want to sound like a football manager that's saying that every test is difficult. The reality is that if Norwich want to be promoted, they should be winning games like this, but it is true that in the Championship, probably the weaker teams are just the more inconsistent ones. I don't think it's like the Premier League where there's such a huge chasm between somebody like a Manchester City and maybe a Norwich when they go up there. I think the clubs are probably a lot closer together, but the weaker teams and the teams that finish lower down the table are the ones that can't produce those performances on a regular basis. But most of them, you get to the end of the season and they've had enough wins against enough strong opposition for you to be able to say that that they do have the players to do it, and that you can't ever switch off against them. So I think Norwich will be wary of that. The fact it's the first game of the season means I think we're unlikely to see a sort of switch off. I think they'll be keen to prove themselves, especially in front of their own fans. But yeah, it will definitely be a keen test. But as I said, and I said this loads of times last season actually, and it ended up, I think, almost predicting where things went wrong for them. If they want to be targeting promotion, these are the games that they have to win, and these are the ones that they don't really have excuses for. It feels like there's less pressure, and probably that point is a bit less valid now because they're not openly speaking about winning the league or finishing in the top two. But David Wagner does no doubt want to be promoted with this side. And you look at a team that gets enough points to get into the playoffs. They won't have had too many slip-ups against teams like this that aren't expected to challenge. So yeah, I think Norwich should be looking at this as something they can win, but equally I don't expect it to be easy at all.
Yeah, if you've got any more late comments, questions, predictions, get them down. We'll come around to those in just a moment. But before we do that, Sam, just want to talk about a player who looks like he's going to be exiting the Carrow Road door pretty shortly, and that's Christos Jollis, who, of course, arrived from PAOK back a couple of years back now for big money, and there was a lot of excitement, lots of hype. He was kind of on that Wonder Kids list. You see that, was meant to be the next big thing, and it's just not really worked for him here. Of course, had the loan spell at FC20 last year. David Wagner brought him back and wanted to have a look at him, and we maybe saw sort of pockets of cameos here and there, but nothing sort of where he was in the team consistently. Felt like he came back in pre-season in a pretty good shape, and I thought maybe this is his time to make the breakthrough, but it's transpired he's not really played many minutes, and it looks like he's going to loan to a move to Fortuna Dusseldorf over in Germany. So what do you make of that move? Is that good sort of timing for him now to go and play football, in a relatively good league, or do you feel maybe it's a bit of a wasted opportunity that he could have been part of the Norwich City plans this season?
I sort of ran out of hope, I think, during that last period of last season. To be honest, I was open to the idea that he could become a key player for Norwich again when he was brought back from 20, but the fact that he only scored one goal, struggled to really get into the team much, and didn't make too many waves in terms of strong performances that were unforgettable in that period, it did feel almost inevitable to me that he wasn't going to be a key player. And you look at the others that have stepped up. Ono Hernandez was a very good player under Wagner in the latter stages of last season. John Rowe is somebody who's increasingly looking like a potential starter and somebody on the names of people's lip on people's lips. Sorry, as a potential starter for the club. Obviously, Science and Fastnacht brought in this summer, as well as Poeta, who we could see leave on loan or something, but there's been no movement on that front either. And you just thought he had a lot of names to battle through, and his time at Norwich hasn't really shown that he can step up when it's required. I'm not doubting his talent, and I think you can see from his technique that he was born with a lot of ability and as a player that can go and achieve big things. But has he done it in a big league yet? He hasn't even really done it in the Championship. He's only achieved things in Greece, and I think he has still got a lot to prove if he's going to live up to the reputation and the potential that a lot of people saw in him sort of early on in his career. I think that's something that he's really struggled with, maybe, and I think a lot of people are pointing to the attitude. There was, of course, that time when Daniel Farke really dug him out, without a lot of consideration, when he took that penalty from Adamida and then missed it. And without knowing, it's difficult to really judge where the problems are, but you can say for sure that 4 managers in Farke, Dean Smith, David Wagner, and the Twente manager when he went there on loan haven't really seen him as a consistent starter and haven't fancied him as part of their plans. And when that happens, and 4 people that are in football and that come across plenty of players and have to make decisions on them all decide that they don't need him, there must be something there. And I know a lot of fans are frustrated and they didn't really feel he got a chance, but I think players who are keen to take that chance and to make an impact will come through that. You look at Gabi Sara, for example, who came in with an injury and started a lot of games on the bench early on in his first season at the club. He got 1 chance in the League Cup and I think he scored, and he played very well against Birmingham. And then catapults himself straight into the league team and plays well immediately. And at Championship level, a player that costs around £9 million should be able to do that with ease, really. But it's becoming a little bit of a concern, the track record that Norwich have around that price point. You look at even Rashica, who's still at the club, obviously going back as far as Van Wolfswinkel, Naismith. Closer was a good player that fans loved, but I'm not sure he actually lived up to the price tag. And you wonder what's going wrong for Norwich in that market and how they can crack that. Because it looks like whenever they want to step up their operation, and if they get promoted this season or whenever it is in future, they are going to have to eventually make that jump from smart bargains to sort of mid-range buys and players that provide value at that level, and they haven't found that balance yet. So it's a little bit of a worrying track record on that front. Obviously, it's not something that Stuart Webber's going to have the chance to put right, given he'll be leaving the club in March at the latest. But somebody has to step up if Norwich ever want to make it to that next level. And Jollis is just another worrying case study of where it's gone for Norwich in that market. But yeah, overall, I think it's a shame. Obviously, we're expecting that move to be on loan, but also we expect it to include an option. And I'd say the chances of him ever playing for Norwich again are very, very slim. So yeah, just a shame really overall, and something that probably could have gone a lot better, and that Norwich would have been hoping would go a lot better.
Yeah, another player who won't play for Norwich City again is Barley Mumba. And Jason Morby asking here on YouTube, do you think we should have used Mumba as a winger, given the defensive cover, to avoid Jakub or Kenny playing at left back if injuries, or is it just me? I mean, what do you make of that, Sam? We've spoken quite regularly about Barley Mumba on sort of recent podcasts and videos on our channel, and maybe sort of the wrongdoings and rights of that deal going back to Plymouth. I think David Wagner maybe didn't fancy him and felt Kellen Fisher was a better option for the system he wanted to play. But so what do you make of Jason's comment there? Would you agree with what he says in terms of should Mumba have been on option for the wing?
I do find it interesting that he thrived as a wing back, and Wagner spent so much time looking at him as a full back and never really tried him in that winger role. I think I remember a time against Swansea when he was brought on to try and find the club a goal, and we're looking back 3 years now. So, admittedly, it's not incredibly valid evidence from a time standpoint, but he played that sort of advanced left role, and I think that was the performance that Norwich fans have been most happy with in his time in yellow and green. So it is interesting, especially given the worries Norwich had in the wide department towards the end of last season. As much as I spoke about the names that Jollis would have to battle through, you look at the likes of Rowan Hernandez. Rowan Hernandez and Poeta were the only real wide options Norwich had at the club when Mumba returned. I suppose Rashica you could throw into that mix as well, but he looks likely to leave, and that has always been the plan this summer. So I am a little bit surprised that he wasn't even tried in that role, and I think it may even have suited him. But I suppose you could say that Wagner did try him in the fullback position, and it just didn't work out. For me, I'm not sure whether there was enough time given for that verdict to be made, but Kellen Fisher, as you said, has really stepped up. Norwich do have a lot of names in that wide area, but it's whether they have the ability to step up that I think will make that decision look like a good one or a bad one. It's difficult to say on Mumba, really, but I was a big fan of his, and I was disappointed to see him go. So I sort of do agree, actually, especially given the fact that Max Aarons is expected to leave. McCallum hasn't had a lot of preseason game time. I wonder if they could have used some of that cover as well, and somebody who could play both as a winger and a fullback. But Wagner likes a small squad, and he has spoken about needing to shift some of the dead weight that was at the club. So if he didn't fancy him, I suppose making the decision while Plymouth's interest was still there was a timely thing, and something that Norwich probably needed to do to extract the maximum financial value that they could get for him this summer. But yeah, it's a difficult one to look at now and really make a decision on. I think let's see how he gets on with Plymouth in the Championship, and then we can decide whether it was the right decision or not.
Finally, before we come round to the all-important score prediction question, Richard on Facebook asking, wonder whether Omobamidele could make a good defensive midfielder. I mean, what do you make of that one, Sam? Is that sort of a position you could see Big Andy going in and playing, or is sort of centre-back just a position that we should be playing that man?
I'm not sure he's yet good enough on the ball and quick enough on the ball to be playing in midfield. The amount of time you have to pick a pass at centre-back, especially in the modern game, is far, far superior to how much time you have in midfield when you often have to receive the ball on the turn and play it one touch and in a position where you've got somebody on your back, and if you lose the ball, the opposition probably go and score from it. So I think that's a totally different pressure, and I'm not sure, given for me, his progression of the ball is actually one of the weaknesses of his game at present. I don't think midfield is where I'd look to put him, and I get that a lot of, and this happened with Ben Godfrey, it's happened with other centre-backs before, and every exciting young defender that Norwich and probably every other team up and down the country have, people do wonder if they could make a good defensive midfielder, but I think he still has areas to work on his game as a central defender, and they don't tend to be the ones that lend themselves to being a midfielder. So no, I'm sorry, Richard, I don't really see him in that role, but I don't know, maybe I'm missing something. What do you reckon, Adam?
Yeah, I could see in the future that could be an option. I mean, someone like Declan Rice, I think when he came through the West Ham academy, a player that was probably expected to play centre back, and he's obviously gone on to reach Arsenal, and at the top of the Premier League and England international, playing in that defensive midfield position. So you can never rule it out, but I think given the current situation, I think centre back's probably the preferred position, and given he's now got Shane Duffy, who is sort of an Irish idol to him almost, I think that's a player that he could learn off. And if he does happen to still be at Colney come the 1st of September, then I think he's a player that could be a pivotal player, hopefully in sort of a promotion push for Norwich this season. Now we'll come round to the point in the show that everyone loves, Sam. The first score prediction time of the season. Of course, I'm sure we could actually make a leaderboard for this and how we get on this campaign. I had quite a good run actually at the start of last season with score predictions. I think it tailed off towards the end. I think my optimism for Norwich results didn't meet kind of where they were on the pitch. But how are you feeling, Sam? Thoughts on the game and a score prediction from you?
Oh yes, difficult. In a way, I didn't miss this, having to put exactly what I thought was going to happen on the line before, but I'm used to predictions now. I've done a few of the championship ones and who I think is going to be the top scorer and player of the season, etc. So I'm trained in the last few weeks. I've had a bit of a predictions pre-season, and I'm going to say 2-1 to Norwich. Let's be a bit positive. I feel like I've been really negative for about 6 months, so I'm going to be positive now at the start of this season. Hope that Norwich can achieve some good results, and I think against probably around mid-table opposition at home, everyone's going to be excited. There's some players that have looked really good in pre-season. Norwich obviously unbeaten in that pre-season, and they've had some good wins against good opposition in recent weeks. I'm going to back them and say 2-1. What about you, Adam? Let's hope you can get your predictions back on track because, as you said, at the start of last season, it was almost reliable. I almost didn't need to watch Norwich after I'd heard your prediction. So hopefully you can get back to that.
Yeah, it looks like Craig on YouTube is enjoying your positivity, Sam. So that's one positive thing for the start of this season. I'm going to go with 2-0 Norwich. That's why I went for yesterday on a whole preview show I was on. And I think it's just been a theme of sort of the last couple of games in pre-season. Of course, they won 2-0 against Toulouse over in Austria. They won 2-0 against Olympiacos last week. So I think it can be a hat-trick of 2-0 wins. But this one, of course, is the one that's most important, the first 3 points of the season on the line. And I think it's important Norwich get off to a positive start, of course. We've already spoke at the start of the show about kind of the pressure, I suppose, on David Wagner for a good start. And I think this is the ideal game against a whole side that, have maybe underperformed at different points, given the situation there at the start of last season where I think there was lots of optimism that they could be a side pushing around the top 6. And yeah, it feels like, especially going away to Southampton next week, if Norwich are going there on the back of a win, then that could be a really good springboard to hopefully go and grind out a positive result against, of course, Russell Martin's Saints. With that, I think we'll round off the show. Lots of other great content across our channels at the moment. We were at David Wagner's press conference yesterday afternoon, so you can go and catch up with the full presser on our YouTube channel. Sam done his tactics board video yesterday, so if you want to know what Sam's predicting for a starting 11, then that's the place to go. I had the pleasure of speaking to a whole fan last night on Terrace Talk, which went live this morning. So if you want some more inside track on Hull City and what we can expect, then that's probably the place to go. Norwich haven't won at home on the opening day of the season since 2002. So it's 21 years in waiting. So it certainly feels like they're due one. Of course, if you're not a Pink and Plus subscriber, you can get a free trial over on our app at the moment. Well worth taking that out with the new season ahead. We've got lots of exciting content coming your way. And of course, Sam will be outside Carrow Road tomorrow. So if you're a fan that wants to get across our channels, then drop Sam a message and we can organise that one. And with that, enjoy the rest of your Friday. Enjoy your weekend. If you're heading to Carrow Road, fingers crossed, we can get a positive result and bring the noise. Of course, that's what David Wagner wants. And for now, we'll leave you. I'll go get some lunch and we'll see you tomorrow at